Cancel it.
How did we get to 5 picture?
Kirby, can you just jump off and give the wind? You know he's gonna win. He's too high. Oh my god. I haven't seen money yet. 30%.
Big grabs are so over. How?
I'm still so you gotta press start. I literally, Caleb, I got 2 kills on him by swallowing him. And yeah, you did. Yeah, you did because Pikachu can't jump that well. No, Pikachu can jump very well. Oh wait, no, I got to take the beat off. There we go. There we go. I'm blue Bowser. He's blue and green Bowser.
Bowser. Who plays Bowser?
Me. He's very good playing. You're playing Bowser. Bryce, don't worry. Look, playing Bowser, don't worry. He is legit the worst character. I thought the worst one. Bowser, I'm sorry, you just don't have a good chance. There may be very much. You gotta play a heavy, play someone else. You don't need to play Bowser. I mean, I think Bowser is the character. You guys are literally going after me.
Yeah, because you know he's the weakest player. He jumps so slow.
Oh my god. Pichu? Really?
Well, get out of here. I'm 1v1ing this person.
Fine, I just wanted to do a whole bunch of damage.
Yeah, come on. I'm gonna grab your little.
Yeah, do it. Come on, do it. I dare you.
I'm gonna come. Are you serious, winner? Are you serious? We're dead. We're doing a 1v1.
Consider yourself dead.
Why are you running? Why is not? Because he wants to. Oh my god, he's so slow.
Like,
I don't know all this buttons. Oh, that's so stupid. Oh my god.
His pockets are tiny, so no, they are like the Bowser.
No, hold on. No, you. I got you. Let's go. I was 1v1. Come over here. Come on, we're gonna 1v1 again. If someone
Hey,
comes over here again, I
like
kill them.
300
Bowser,
megabytes.
get over here. We're
See?
1v1. Okay, come on. Pichu versus Bowser. Well, I don't know. Hey, get out of here. Pichu versus Bowser. Me and him are 1v1. Stop it. Stop. Get out of here.
Yeah,
I kill. I did so much.
Oh my god. You respect me.
Okay, Caleb, you're dead. You still my kill.
Get over here, Bowser.
Come on, Caleb.
He's
Come here.
He's gonna kill me. I'm single. Get over it. No, he isn't. Yes, he does, and I kill him. Oh, okay, alright. I see you. What kind of kill the last time? I called Dorcos. He's like Android. Come on, get over here.
Okay,
Pokemon versus Mario.
7. However, that is the newest Android symbols because of the thing I installed in the Play Store. I have to. So the reasons why it's slower is I have a bunch of like.
That was pretty good. That was pretty good. I don't think mine has but I'm gonna get you. You have this many apps on your phone?
Oh, well, these are factory
How much you Cuneo?
I hate the ones that factory control. Right? And then they're like the football ones.
Yeah, they're like factory control like
I mean, football's cool, but I don't want to watch football, but look. I don't watch football at all. I won't be able to. I don't watch football.
how did you get me with that? Come here, you little. Yeah, those are little pips.
Wait for those.
I'm winning. Game. Please. Yeah,
The only really effective queen is the one in this with Android. I have there. No, Bryce, Pichu, because Bryce is important. Pichu just went against Bowser in one. What? I mean, I fell through the map because the. No, I think you just accepted the fact that I was going to win. Did I just? No, don't you?
Unless it's a sound effect.
It's gonna be a long game.
Make it smoke out.
Hey, game doesn't matter.
Oh my gosh, Bryce! If you have a Bryce, it's phone be slow. You guys know the difference.
If you have a virus,
Why is it like?
what are you doing?
I killed him with one of these. I killed 2 people in a row with one of these. Hold on. I'm explaining stuff. Mate, back off.
Fine, seriously!
Stop. Right. So you know this move? Yeah. I killed 2 people back to back. Literally mid-air.
That's like his slowest move.
No, it got the most power though.
I know, but it's so slow. How did they not avoid it?
And I had to learn he's a big boy.
Wait, did you see sick now?
Big boy. And seasick? Yeah, I
That's really hard to see sick. Actually, that's impressive. Wait, who lost?
Literally, I grabbed him, threw him off. I did not hear you say that.
He called fourth. I called third.
It's not about what you heard.
So, yeah.
It's about what they said.
You know, I'm pretty sure Hitler said the same thing.
Oh my god.
Mac, and then we have somebody that should say cheese.
And then we'll have one person named Ann and one person named Cheese, and then we'll line up.
Okay, how are you? Game's over.
Yeah. And then we just line up.
I am not trying
That's
to
my decision.
Wait till the game's over.
do it again. Wait, whoa. You cannot do this.
Greasy, is it? Not greasy, that's good, that's good.
Oh, I'm so greasy.
No, you're good. It's that one you gotta work. It's one of, no, it's that one.
Greasy.
That one, you put your hands on it, you're like, oh, I just submerged my hands.
Oh
in
yeah,
melted butter.
that one doesn't have the bumpy stuff anymore.
Well, plus nobody wants to use it.
That one has the butt.
That grab, how does that work?
Because I cannot stand.
Wait, does the wireless one work?
It's 6:52.
I mean, does it work?
Double
Does it actually work? Probably not. That's how I was with that.
Hey, no, Mark, get out of here.
Yeah. Yeah. How many megapixels?
I'll stay up here.
So many. 5?
Fall off.
How'd you know? It's actually 5 megapixels.
Yes, I'm just serious.
Why?
Which I know there's not one, so 1 megapixel.
How do you have a 1 megapixel?
I don't know. I just think it's funny that most phones have a 5 megapixel front facing.
Yeah. I think I have 5 in the front, 16 in the back.
Seems like it's the best.
Apple.
Apple thinks it.
I know. They
Apple
can't-
just gets roasted.
Whoa!
Rolling
You just
media.
got really long.
Yeah, no.
Really long haircut. I might try Pichu next time.
Oh, no, Bryce, you don't want to.
I love Pichu.
Oh my god. Because Bryce, Pichu's so sensitive.
I know, I've tried
Why would you
Pichu
not eat
before.
Pichu? Because that's the point. It's not just like you're using it for thermal and doing really good.
I just kind of want to try it.
You know, just your character you should try. You should try Bowser.
No, I tried Bowser. He's not really good.
I think he's Waluigi.
Waluigi's not
I know it's a joke because
I
he's
know,
never been
I
in
know.
Smash.
I know it's a big joke.
But everyone wants him in it.
They didn't even put him in Ultimate.
Yeah, we gotta bring up the
Right? Yeah, I like
Bully!
every character but him. They even have like Peach.
Bully!
She sucks.
Kill him, please!
What? No! Oh my god.
Good job.
I just killed him with this.
Who just died?
Caleb.
Oh, okay.
I killed Caleb with
Wait, no.
No, bully! Bully!
Have you seen the whole lab subreddit? It's like
Oh my gosh, it is. You're disgusting. God, you're just swine.
Not as bad as Bowser.
Probably not the swine.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
He's a word about that joke.
configurations that they'll use in the field. They have like main servers.
Mine.
Like it's just very
I did.
in their home. So it's ridiculous. So they go out
I want you.
Ew. That's like calling you.
Yeah.
No, I thought that. I didn't find it.
Yes. I think I know. I have
That was why I eventually had to stop it. Because they most of
What? How did I get to be named Rose? 26. Yes. 426.
Miss, name people. You're that hot guy that figured it out.
Yes.
No, I might just keep the name Rose.
Oh my god. Why? Why? How?
Okay, yeah, they keep it. That was
Yes. That was so close.
Steve.
I'll let you finish legend.
Sorry.
Why? It ends up being more expensive. Yeah, and if you take one out, the whole thing stops.
Oh, I know. Chris, mom. What? How did I hit you?
Yes. You win. How do you win? Something like that.
No.
How? You guarded. I'm winning. I'm winning. I believe it's happening. What are you doing over there?
Tell me, do you have your phone? I went out there.
All right, guys, time for group game. Please, please enjoy our lovely new cushiony chairs. Ah, all 5 of them.
Yes.
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 For some reason, the other ones are on the back corner. I don't understand it. I don't understand it.
You don't.
Group
Yeah,
game, you gotta check.
you should. It's like
A group game is not what
I
we're
love it.
like. It's not the name of the game. It's just it's a
Keep
description
me strong.
of the thing. Oh yeah, put your phone in the bucket.
Yeah.
If you got a phone, now's the perfect time to put it in the phone bucket.
You have your phone.
If you don't have a
Darn
phone,
it.
that's okay. You're part
I
of the
don't
cool
wanna-
crowd. No one else knows it.
If someone steals.
It's just it's a secret. Secret. All right. Who's playing on the top TV?
Definitely wasn't me.
No one here?
let anyone else steal it.
Was Gio in the Gio left? Gio left my TV on. Arr. Can someone go turn off the TV? The trick is to hold down the only button there is without letting the menu come up, and then it goes off really fast.
The person that was doing it isn't in here.
You just hold it down, the TV shuts off. It's amazing. It's like a power button or something.
Whoa.
I had the original. What do you do?
Ours is the baby. You open the slot on your NES, and if you feed it a bunch, then it has our mini NES. Our NES
That's how
Classic.
babies are made?
That's how NES Classics
Whoa.
are made, Jaden. Don't be silly. You gotta feed a mama bear to get a baby bear.
True.
Feed a nest, you're not gonna get a baby. That's just nonsense.
All
right. There is a laptop yonder way on the kitchen counter, and if you have not put in your suggestions, your vote for some summer topic nights, please go do so now. Now is the perfect time if you have not done this yet. Go do it now. Well, no one else is doing it. It's the perfect time. You can do it anonymously if you want. Don't put your name in, or you can put your name in. Totally up to you. You can leave your name part blank. So put it in, don't put it in, whatever. Just go cast your vote to pick out what's happening in summer. Do it. And then your sister can do it after.
Nathan used to do it too with boys.
Right on. Okay. I know some of you guys haven't done it because you haven't been here the last 2 weeks, and it wasn't here more than 2 weeks ago. What else is new? We've got a vote thing going on for topic nights. Topic nights are going to start when summer hits in June. We got new chairs. We got more of those on the way. Supposed to have 20 of those when all is said and done. We're getting them in all different colors so that you guys can just like pick your favorite color, and that's your chair now. Summer camp is coming up in July. Sign up by Easter Sunday, which is this Sunday. Sign up by Easter Sunday to save $20 on camp.
Why do I get put in it?
Because you said whoa. Tell your siblings / friends that are not in junior high yet, but will be next year. Does that make sense? If you have any siblings or friends that are going to be graduating up into junior high, let them know that they should be signing up ASAP to get the discount.
What if I don't want them to go?
Well, you're not going to be there, so it doesn't really make a difference, does it?
I just want to punish them.
Well, then you should send them. And then you should tell them a bunch of fake stuff about how camp will be, and then they'll get there, and they'll be like,
Fake rules. Just make up.
yes!
rules.
Like things you have to wear on certain days.
Yeah.
Yes. Things you have to call the leaders.
This
You
is
have
since
to-
it's old games, you have to wear 90s and 80s clothes.
You need to have
Okay,
you
that
need to
just
have a
sounds like a
large
good time.
5-hound tube. Lots of neon.
Yes.
Lots of neon
Lots of
colors.
I like that.
Neon was the future in the 90s. That's what we thought, but it turned out it was actually just the 90s.
Now it counts.
My long sleeve and pants and there's no
I guess it
hoodie
depends on
or
whose future you're subscribing to.
none.
Yeah. So anyways, camp is going to be sweet. Sign up for camp. You can sign up on our website. You can sign up via paper.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you, Hunter.
Was he just there just to do
Even
that?
you could even sign up in our app, our secret church app that no one's supposed to know about.
I'm gonna tell everyone.
You have
Don't do
one
it. Don't do it.
Secret.
We're out of them. You're, okay. Cool.
What is this secret church?
You can also just sign up online.
It says it's right down there.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
the cheat code.
That's why when you go to sign up online, it asks you if you're in 5th, 6th, or 7th grade. It doesn't let you be 8th grade.
You can't.
Because if you're 8th grade now, you're actually going to high school camp.
What if you get held back?
Oh.
Then you are still an 8th grader right now, which is a weird paradox.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Oh.
but I would be.
That's a strange question. I'll have to make a box for you. The I got held back
Other.
checkbox.
Just the other box.
Yeah. Other.
You'd be surprised.
5th, 6th, 7th,
Everyone will
or
put
other.
other.
I guess you could go be a leader, right? You could just
Yeah.
go as a leader. That'd work. Okay. Anyways, that's it. And now we're going to play. That's not how you open soda.
I mean,
You open your soda all at
and then
once
you put
and
it
you
real
take
close.
you take your face full of soda explosion like a man. That's how you open a soda.
You go. I mean, this is not as bad as it is.
Okay. You need a chair, sir. Where do you want to sit?
Oh, thank I was sitting there again.
But then I knocked the trash over.
All right.
I
What's-
have a phone.
What's the name of this game?
You do.
Eating Chipotle.
Is it the Legend of Chair?
Yeah,
Abomination.
yes, it was Legend of Chairs.
Legend of Chairs? Is it plural?
Fun
I think
chair
so.
game.
Yeah.
It was Alex who knew it. Alex knew it like
Yeah, I
boom.
know.
He knew the title.
He's
Legend-
camping.
Legend of Chairs.
Stupid. I mean,
Right?
we miss him.
Stupid.
I'm pretty sure it's
Camping.
just called Good and Fun
Stupid
Chair
camping
Game.
butt.
Where the whole.
What?
I'm pretty sure it's just called Good and Fun Chair Game.
Good and fun chair game.
Good and-
You're just in your little T-shirt world.
No.
What's his teacher?
Yeah, sure. I,
I like it.
okay.
Nice.
Uh,
I
all
wear it.
right. Do you guys know how to play Legend of Chair?
Yeah.
No, you don't. You sit in a chair, and then either you win, or you don't. That is
Either you win or you
that is essentially how it works.
This is a hard game.
So we're going. It is an incredibly hard game. We'll see if you can pick up on it.
Yeah.
You guys ever played a game where they don't tell you all the rules up front?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, that's this one.
Oh.
All right, you guys ready?
Last time I did this, I saw you lose.
If you've played,
I know.
you're going to teach the other people how to play by playing. And if you've not played, you're going to learn how to play by playing and watching the other people play.
You don't even have to watch.
Great.
You just need to sit in your chair.
Great, I don't know.
Well, it helps though if you think about it and you watch. It does. I don't want to spoil too much. Okay, you guys ready?
Yep.
Okay, on your
No
marks,
instructions, not a single thing.
get set,
It's gross.
What is
go.
what is
Oh,
happening? I'm so
All right, I'm going to close my eyes. You have 10 seconds.
what?
10,
What's happening?
9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, make sure you are done and you're in your chair. Good. Good, good, good.
I don't know. Why do you have your arms open like you're just not gonna do anything?
What if it does?
You just see those.
What?
We could honestly think of that. We could be like, whoever's sitting in the chair, hands out like this.
No, Bryce totally won. He's absolutely closest.
One is the
No one is nearly as close.
Oh, it's close.
Oh, he needs a chair. Welcome. You're new. You picked a heck of a time to walk in the room. We're playing a game where we don't tell you how to play. So you're actually about half the room is right there with you. You have no idea what just happened.
Basically just.
And you're now one of them. Congratulations. Have a seat. But you did lose, just for the record. You didn't win that round. Because not having a chair was not the win condition. So, good try. All right, you guys ready? On your marks. Round 2. Get set.
What are we doing?
Go. You have 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stop. Make sure you're in your chair. Okay. You get half a point. You get a point. You get a point. Don't move. I'm still judging.
This is really. Bryce, I don't think
Okay, that's it. That's all the points. All right, so point for you, Nathan. A point for Jonathan, and half a point for you.
3 points are.
All right. On your marks. By the way, they had their feet on their chair. Get set. Go. You have 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stop. All right. Is there anyone out in the hallway?
That's me.
No. All right, Jaden, you get a point.
Is it furthest from you?
Yeah, it was furthest from me that time. All right, ready? On your marks. Get set. Go. 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stop. Okay. Let's see. You get a point.
Bryce, no.
You get a point.
No, no, please, no. Bryce, just stop. I
You
will
get a
pay you
point.
money.
You get a point.
Ha.
No, please. Vietnam flashback. Just stop.
You get a point.
Just stop.
Jaden, you get a point. You would have had a point. You came down.
No,
from the chair.
he's making me
You
laugh.
He was gonna die.
You made me lose, Jaden.
He wasn't.
Okay, 50% of why I was telling you that was out of love for you. The other half, I just
Okay.
didn't like it.
I think, yeah, Hunter gets a point.
My feet hurt.
You got a point.
didn't want him staying.
I
All
get
right.
a point.
All right, ready? On your marks. Get set. Go. 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stop. Okay. I don't think anybody got it, so you all lose.
What was it?
I can't tell you because you have to do it again. Ready, set, go. 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stop.
My foot's sitting down. It's great.
Nope, you all lose. Go. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stop.
I win.
Holy crap.
I win. I win.
I think you just killed the chair.
I
That's all you got.
I flattened him.
You guys are doing horrible. 5,
Oh.
4, 3, 2, 1. Stop.
Yeah.
Jonathan gets the win there. Good job, Jonathan.
What'd he do?
He's touching someone else's chair.
Oh.
On your marks, get set,
Wait,
go!
wait.
5,
We don't
Four.
the leg, huh?
3, 2, 1. Stop.
I don't think that's sitting.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I think,
Statue in Rio.
if I'm not mistaken, I gotta double check Bryce over there. I can't see him that well.
That statue was
You
the
got a
original
point.
statue of T-posers. They were just trolling their
T-posers, it's Jesus.
No.
How did
Oh, yeah, I'll count that. Bryce gets a point too.
what?
Their legs were crossed.
This is such a
Good job, kids.
my life's crossed. Does that count?
On your marks, get set, go! 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and Zane gets a point. And yeah, you get a point. That's it. I think that's it.
What was it for?
Oh, they both had their backs to me.
Yes,
On your
I
marks,
knew that was something.
Get set, go! 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stop.
This is my chair. He's sitting.
Okay.
I'm over here.
All right. You got a point, and you got a point. Oh, you both got a point. Yes. What is your sister's name? I don't know your name yet. Trinity. You got a point too.
Oh my god. Like you should know.
Well, I probably have known Trinity since she was born. I just don't remember because I am that kind of holes in my head kind of person.
Wait, what do we get points for?
You were all touching your heads.
I just scratched my head. Before.
You were.
I was
When I
just.
said stop, you were.
I was just scratching my head 2
You guys made
seconds
3
ago.
points.
Dang.
He's like touching his head with 4 limbs. All right, ready on your. Does anyone have 3 points yet?
I have 2.
2,
I have
2,
I have 1.
2. Zane, you have 3.
Yeah, I had my legs crossed and my crossed one way
I-
You kidding me? Am I that bad at this?
Are
Sorry,
they
Zane.
all in the same
Oh, and-
order?
I went.
They might not even be included in every game. All right. Well, I think a leader just showed you guys all up.
No, his back is pointed towards the ground. Not towards the
Well, like he's oriented away from you.
That's. I don't think that's facing a.
If I were to be in a traditional sitting stance, I would be facing it.
That's all I'm saying.
But I have reorientated that traditional stance to be like this.
All right. Let's do one more round. Let's see if a kid can catch Zane. Let's see here. Final round. Final countdown. Final everything.
It's the
Here it is.
final.
Everything. Okay. On your marks.
funny guy.
You get 10 seconds this time. On your marks, get set, go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Stop.
Oh
Jaden
my
got it.
god.
No, you got it too.
Oh, who else is out there?
People, Bryce and Nathan.
Bryce, Nathan, and Jaden all got a point.
You guys got points.
What?
Wait, what? Nathan, you're right here. Why did I get duped by that? That's
Other
dumb.
name. No, the other name.
Oh, other Nate?
Yeah, that's not Nathan.
How did they get points?
That's Nate.
Yeah.
No, I
This
thought
is
I
Nathan.
thought that was Nate.
There can only be one Nathan.
Nate and Bryce and Jaden got a point.
So how did they get
Did
points?
anybody get
I'm
3?
Nate.
Daniel,
I'm
you're
Nate.
Good job, Jaden.
How did they
You're
get
also Nate? I thought you were Nathaniel.
He's Nathaniel.
He's Nathaniel now?
Yeah.
But I've been calling him Nate for a year. I can't start calling him Nathaniel
I
now.
think we'll call him Nathaniel.
Excuse me. How did they get points?
They were in the hall.
You did that.
Break
already.
it down.
No, I didn't furthest from me. I asked when he was in the hall because I wouldn't be able to see them.
Break it down.
Also, don't die. That's always a rule. Okay, guys. Form up your nice big chair C.
I did not know that.
It is time to commence.
Just got that going.
You could have changed it at any time in this entire round. And won.
I just want to
That was the
appreciate
whole
the
point.
fact that I got 3 points.
I'm gonna have a
Guys,
moment
they
of
work
this.
it out too.
Don't step back.
Yes.
No! No! No!
Guys.
Alright, we're gonna need our Bibles tonight if you don't
I
have
got
them.
some Jesus in my eye.
What?
You think you have it?
Em- Oh, never mind.
That's pretty impressive. No. Don't you wish you have it?
Right.
You get out of there!
You all come here.
Oh man.
Look at their chair.
We've entered the tepid water season.
Yes, we have.
Oh yeah.
know,
Oh, what is that season?
We got one of those.
Spicy.
We got one of those filters on the faucet, and it's like for most of the year, you get nice, cold, fresh water coming out of it. But our water pipes are
I
weird.
love crisp water.
They don't come up out of the ground right into the sink. They like come up in the front of the house, and then they go through the front house wall, like all the way around the house, and then go up into the sink. So as soon as summer hits, so even late spring like this, it's just like immediately coldest water you can have is sun-baked water. And then it's in your cup, and then you drink it, and you go, oh, I guess I'll live.
That isn't even cheaper to do it that way.
Did you? Oh, yeah, you would know. So yeah, I think
Because you'd have to go.
it's because our house wasn't a duplex when it was built, and so I think they added a kitchen on. I don't think it used to be there. So it was like a retrofit, and we're on a slab, so they couldn't do certain things. Anyways, tonight we are entering History of the World Part 2, the Great Flood and the Ice Age. Last week we did History of the World Part 1. We looked at the creation of the world, sin entering the world, death entering the world, and one guy got to go straight to heaven. It was a sweet deal. So, anyways, this night we are covering from 3004 BC to 2004 BC, aka the second 1,000 years after creation. And we're going to once again cover 4 different events. We are doing a bit of a pattern tonight that is different
It's
from
a
last week.
recycled bird.
Tonight we're going to be looking at cause and effect, and then cause and effect.
It's a
So
lighthouse.
they are linked up. It is not a lighthouse.
The
lighthouse.
But there's
Lighthouses do not have a spherical.
Well, if
construction
there
to
could be
them.
stairs actually going over.
It could
Oh,
be,
I
but
bet
that's not
like
how
a
lighthouses
machine
work.
and
The
all
stairs
that.
are on the inside.
I bet.
Because when there's like a storm,
Prove it.
you don't want to walk around outside. You'll slip and die.
Well, I've actually
That's
seen
the best part.
actual
I'd be okay with
cartoon
that.
actually has that, and I was like, huh, that's
Oh,
a
it's okay.
lighthouse.
This is actually a ziggurat. That's what this is meant to look like, iconography
It's
wise.
just actually.
Okay, anyways, we're gonna move straight into the
It looks
first
like
section. So, first off on our timeline, we have Seth. Seth, if you recall from last week, is the 3rd son of Adam and Eve. You guys remember the first 2 sons of Adam and Eve?
Job.
Job, that was it.
Oh, was that right?
No, not even
No,
close.
I was talking to Nathan because he said Job's up there, and then I was like, it's Job.
No,
You gotta answer the right question, Gene. Who knows who Adam and Eve's
Right.
first two sons are?
Nathaniel, Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel, very nice.
Well,
And then
one
last week we
thing.
learned Cain murdered Abel, and shortly after Abel died, Adam and Eve gave birth to a 3rd son, Seth. Now he has already lived a long time by the time he enters into this little window. We're chopping off our timeline here at 3004 to 2004 BC. So he's already lived a very long time by the time we get to here. He had a son named Enos, who had a son named Canaan, who had a son named Mahalalel, who had a son named Jared, who had a son named Methuselah, who had a son named Lamech, who had a son named Noah. And that's where it gets interesting. Now, if you guys had to guess, where is the flood
Oh.
on the timeline?
Probably right below where it shows the little boat.
No. No. Anybody? Yes. After he had his sons. Okay, that's a good idea. Because the Bible actually talks about them helping him build. So yeah, they had to be born before the boat took off, right?
Is it
I like
after
ham.
Job?
Say again?
Is it after Job?
Is it after Job? It's a really good question.
Ham's pretty tasty.
Near the lighthouse looking thing?
And
That's not a bad guess. That's pretty good. Anyone else?
Who named
Yes.
their son Ham?
You can actually use logic, even if you don't know the dates, to figure it out off this slide.
After Mr. Nimrod built that tower and shot an arrow to heaven.
Yeah, but.
And then God got angry and then,
I'm sorry,
no.
you're wrong.
There
There is one hint from the slide you should take note of, and that's the order the icons come in. That tells you that the tower comes after the flood.
So
Picture him.
wouldn't that be the effect right after the boat?
After the boat comes this effect, and then after this comes this effect. So it's like cause, effect, cause, effect.
Ham and Stacy.
Don't.
Ham what? That's
Do it.
a little weird when you consider how old this ham is.
Oh, that's an old ham.
I can believe it.
Yes!
I do gotta say, Jaden just thought that ham came from cows.
Does it? I'm not a meat expert. I don't study meat.
Hey, you know what?
I'm
There's a
Will,
lot of
I don't
bacon out there that
listen
comes
to
from
it.
cows
I
now,
know.
so it's a weird
Dude,
word.
I don't
Maybe
care.
ham is
All I
next.
know is that I eat it.
Beef
I
bacon,
eat a lot of
turkey
things.
bacon.
How do you think I
They're
got
very
this way?
popular. You've never, like,
I just
seen-
shot a turkey.
No? Okay.
was
Okay,
nice.
never mind. See the point.
I shot a picture of myself.
I shot my first turkey.
That has nothing to do with anything. Why
Okay. Based on logic, here's what you guys should be able to deduce. If you know the story of Noah, you know there was only 8 humans on the ark. 8 humans. So there was Noah, his 3 boys, and all 4 of them were married. So all 4 of them took their wives with them. Okay? So if there's 8 humans on the ark, and we know the 4 of them that are the dudes, Noah, Japheth, Shem, and Ham, then you know that Lamech wasn't on the ark, Methuselah wasn't on the ark, Jared wasn't on the ark, Mahalalel wasn't on the ark, Canaan wasn't on the ark, Enoch wasn't on the ark, Seth wasn't on the ark. You know they weren't on the ark. That's your logic for the day. Which tells you it also happened after they were dead, or was the cause of death for, I don't know, maybe the last one to die. And so it turns out, you can do the math, whether he died in the flood or not, we don't actually know. But math-wise, we do know that Methuselah's year of death is the same year as the flood. So it could be total coincidence. He could have just died and then the flood happened. Or he actually died in the flood. So that's the exact year. We have it marked down on the calendar. It's pretty sweet. We're going to actually read more about the flood than just these few verses. So whip open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 7.
How many years does Genesis cover?
Ooh, that's a good question. Everything from last week, everything from this week, and some of next week. Okay.
It took us more than 2 weeks.
Em, you want to go with him, or Zane, one of you guys? He's going to go seek Tylenol before a headache.
If only Noah had Chipotle.
It's not drugs. You
Okie doke. Hunter, are you okay?
21st century kids thinks everything's drugs.
You should come back. We're going to read.
You were born in
He thought
That'd be a smart idea. Just stop doing
Nathan.
quiet. Just stop talking about that.
Okay. Starting all the way over here with Caleb. Chapter 7. We're going to go ahead and just read the whole chapter real quick. It's not a very long chapter. Yeah, go for it. You don't have to read the whole thing yourself. Just read the first half. Please read along. We're all going to take a turn reading. We're on page 7 of the Bible.
That's really far into
It's interesting somehow chapter 7 fell on page 7. Weird.
You guys are
I know, it's especially weird when you stop and consider the chapters are not a page long.
What?
Yeah, that's not math I want to do. All right, go for it, Caleb. You got verse 1. Everyone's going to read a verse, so hush up and read along with your eyeballs so you know where we're at and you know when your turn comes.
My brain just exploded.
Until it's your turn to read, yes. Yes, you can. Okay, wait, guys. The people in this room that are whispering are louder than him reading. I'm not even kidding. I'm standing closer to him, too. Shh. Try again, Caleb. Okay, you got verse 2? Yes.
Take with you 7 pairs, male and female, each animal. I have a donkey for, I have food for eating and for sacrifice.
Keep going.
And take 1 pair of each of the birds.
Okay.
Also take 7 pairs of every kind of bird. There must be a male and female for each pair of food. Ensure that all life will survive on the earth after the flood.
7 days from now, I will make the rains pour down on the earth. And it will rain for 40 days. He likes 40 days, doesn't he? And 40 nights until I have wiped the earth of all the living things that I have created.
So Noah did everything as the Lord commanded him.
Oh, 600 years old. The flood covered the earth.
He went on board the boat to escape the flood. He and his wife and his sons and their wives.
The family of all the various kinds of animals, those who feared for eating and sacrifice, and those were not along with all the birds and the small animals that scurry along the ground. He emptied the boat and the fish, and all the
After 7 days, the waters of the flood came and covered the earth.
When Noah was 600 years old, on the 17th day of the second month, all the underground waters erupted from the earth, and the rain fell in mighty torrents from the sky.
You skipped some.
Ah, I'm so sorry. Trinity, you want to read the verse after mine?
The rain continued to fall for 40 days and 40 nights.
I feel really bad. I skipped you. Sorry.
They're,
I
they
think
are
you skipped
paired
everyone too.
now. They are one.
They are one. No, they're sisters. It's different.
They are one.
Hunter wants you guys to be one person. No, I don't expect you to acquiesce to him. Like just.
Yeah, you should.
Put it out.
Never say yes to me.
Also, Caleb totally left.
Oh, yeah,
So,
We know.
yeah, it's your turn again.
I don't know what you're playing on.
All right, verse 13. Verse 13.
That very day, Noah had gone into the boat with his wife and his sons. Shem, Ham, and whatever.
Japheth.
Japheth and their wives.
Verse 14. Dude, it was like 7,000 years ago. Names are different, okay? Ham wasn't a word back then, okay?
What if it's around
No, it
saying?
isn't.
Like
It's
Joe.
weird.
Yes.
So
It's like naming your kid Nike. It's weird.
Oh, he's
You can read that.
Yeah, you can read. Name your kid.
Verse
You are
14.
given What?
Verse 14. She was stuck on the names. You forgot where we are.
With them in the boat were pairs of every kind of animal, domestic and wild, large and small, along with birds of every kind.
All right, wait. Pause.
Everyone shut up.
I know. It's crazy things. You've missed a few verses. Do you want to read some to us?
Yeah, he could just finish it up.
Why do you have this thing? Why do you have this thing?
Do you mind?
What?
Do you mind catching up and reading 2 verses for us? Page 7, actually. You're in chapter 7.
I just was
They
there.
were trying to tell you the verse
Ah.
as this. They forgot to. You didn't have to. Okay. If you could read us down here, 15 and 16 real quick.
2 by 2 they came into the boat, representing every living thing that breathes, a male and female each time each entered, just as God commanded Noah. Then the Lord closed the door behind them for 40 days. The flood waters were before. I have a question.
Yeah.
So if it's every living animal in the world, what if one died? They'd go extinct.
Yeah.
But
None died, though.
that
That's a
is
good
so dangerous.
Not necessarily.
How many died?
Well, first off, it wouldn't necessarily wreck the ecosystem to have an extinction occur, as evidenced by the fact that we've had many extinctions since the flood,
I see.
and it doesn't necessarily wreck that ecosystem. It adjusts the ecosystem. It definitely affects the ecosystem.
Since there were 8 people on the boat, how did they not die from the animals? They could have killed them. Alligators, snakes.
There's a really big thing you're missing here. How did they get them on a boat? So then why not have that answer just be the automatic answer for the first question? Because either it's completely absurd that they ever got them on a boat, or it's completely logical that they stayed alive. You can't have it both ways.
How big is the boat?
Quite large. There's dimensions back in chapter 6. We've run it out in the parking lot before. It's roughly 3 times the length of this building and twice the width of this building.
How does that fit every animal?
Well, there is some speciation that occurs over time. So the odds of you actually needing every species we currently have is really low. You probably wouldn't need that many species because a lot of species just come from breeding. Just the breakup of DNA into groups and clusters as they move into different ecosystems. But that said, you really could fit a lot into a boat that size.
Evolution, I don't think would be a thing if God created everyone. I don't think there would be very much evolution. 'Cause
So evolution is a tricky word. Evolution just means change over time. It doesn't necessarily attribute stuff to a certain time scale. However, we do have animals that are relatives of each other that look darn near similar. If you guys have ever seen a side-by-side photo of like a mastodon, a woolly mammoth, and an elephant, but mastodon, woolly mammoth, and an elephant basically look like loose cousins. They almost look like the same animal. If you look at certain features of the woolly mammoth, certain features of the elephant, they look like the same animal. And just the same for mastodons. Different features, but certain features look just the same between a mastodon and an elephant. The skull on an elephant is essentially like if you took half of a mastodon skull and half of a woolly mammoth skull. That looks the same. They look identical. Now, when you trace the fossil records, it gets even more interesting. Because if you take a flood this size, where you flood the entire Earth, and you rain on it and you let water out from under the crust for 40 straight days until you've sunk every single mountain under the surface of that water. Now keep in mind, they're different mountains back then. If you flood the entire Earth, you're making brand new mountains when you're done. They're not the same mountains anymore. So you're getting rid of the whole rough topography of the planet. So whatever there was before, I don't know. There wasn't an Everest before. That mountain got formed during the flood. So there was mountains, it's completely different mountains. They're all over the place in different places. So pre-flood, post-flood, totally different
the
topography.
Earth would be way bigger. Kind of floating. Wouldn't you kind of get to start getting to the clouds?
No,
Well, some mountains go so high that they can see the land.
but that's not how fluid dynamics work. So when you have an atmosphere, it's floating on top of everything underneath it. The air works just like the fluid of the ocean works with gravity. So if you raise the ceiling of the ocean up, the atmosphere thins, but minuscule, and it moves up. It stays above the ocean. Does that make sense? So like, no matter how high you go, the clouds are the same distance above you, if the floor is coming up with you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it all floats on each other. The air floats just like water floats. No. I can say that one emphatically. No. There's really not much fluid dynamics involved. Maybe some oil. Okay, so we did take a pause reading. I want to finish the chapter. I love the questions though. We'll come back to more questions when we're done the chapter. We're nearly done too. So verse.
Last question. How many are we going? How many?
Oh, just this chapter. Just to the end. So like to verse 24.
That's it.
We'll read more later, but for now, yeah. So verse 18 to either Jonathan or Bryce. I don't remember who read last.
We didn't actually finish verse 17.
Ah,
We
because we
just
turned the
got to
page and
comment.
stopped. Covering the ground and lifting the boat high above the earth. 18 to Jonathan.
Okay. As the waters rose higher and higher above the ground, the boat floated safely on the surface.
Finally, the water covered even the highest mountains on the earth, rising more than 20 feet above the highest peaks.
All the living things on earth dead, died. Birds, domestic animals, wild animals, small animals, that scurry along the ground, and all the people.
Everything that raised and lived on the water not like the other living things with each of the living stuff. Small animals that scurry along the ground and birds of the sky. All were destroyed. The only people who survived were Noah and his 15 in the boat.
And the flood waters covered the earth for 150 days.
I didn't skip you this time, right? we just ended. It's not my fault. Okay. It's always my fault. I know.
But I like your shirt.
He read 3 verses. I'm trying to give him 2.
That is
You know, it's like
I
I try. Okay, so
like your shirt.
the timing of this doesn't really fit well on our timeline because on this timeline I literally have a pixel for every year, and the flood is measured in days. So like, you just grade the pixel. It wouldn't work. So really what we've got here when you look at the flood timeline is you've got 40 days for the ramp up, 40 days for the waters to go from normal to top 22 feet above the mountains. Then it stays there 22 feet above the mountains, that level, for 150 days. So you add the two together, you got 190 days. And then for the rest of the year, it takes that much time for the water to go back down. Think about that for a second. You're talking about essentially half a year, part of it ramping up, part of it just staying full, and then the other half of the year slowly coming back down to like quasi-normality. And you can't really call it normality because the dirt would be like soupy soup for a really long time, especially at the lower elevations. Just be crazy marshy, crazy squishy. But there's another side effect to all this that people never thought about during the first. Actually, yes.
Whoa.
You nailed it. How did you get that? For so many years, no one thought about global warming in context of a worldwide flood until they just ran the computer simulation, and then it turned out it was automatic. They didn't have to program it in. If you use a real weather simulation and you just say, okay, water comes up from the crust.
Wait, he was actually serious?
I don't think he was, but he was right.
I was like guessing.
Yeah, actually right. So if you let all that water up, the water came from under the crust. It came from next to the mantle. So the water wouldn't be at normal seawater temperatures when it entered our above the crust ecosystem. It would be at raised temperatures. So then you add to that the fact that the ocean is the CO2 processor of our planet. It's what allows our planet to keep its CO2. You have this crazy thing that happens. First, as the ocean water comes up during the year, the whole planet gets way hotter than it's used to. Like way, way hotter than it's used to. When you heat water, it starts to expel its CO2. It starts to lose its CO2. So it releases far more CO2 into the atmosphere than it normally would because there's more water and it's hotter. Then you've got CO2 in the atmosphere like we've never seen before. Us now with factories going can't do nothing on an ocean that covers the entire planet. Our factories do not cover even one tiny 1/100th of the square miles that the ocean would cover if it covered everything. So when it releases all this CO2, the whole planet gets set up for a crazy cook cycle. As it gets set up for that cook cycle, it starts to evaporate things. It starts to change the buoyancy of tectonic plates. It starts to move everything around with way larger oceanic currents than we've ever seen before, starting to distribute and sort the silt and the dirt that gets kicked up when you flood an entire planet. As this happens, God says, okay, water, get back down under the crust. And then a mass exodus of the water occurs, where it all seeps back down between the plates. It all gets sucked back up. It all goes back into the atmosphere. And as it gets back towards normality, there's a swing that occurs. Because when there's all this CO2 in the atmosphere, and it all starts to be released and cook everything, the water starts evaporating at a crazy rate. The CO2 can start bleeding out of the nearly non-existent ozone layer, and you start to have a CO2 decline as it swings back and as green plants start to take root again, and as the algae go, whee! Because it doesn't list those in the living things. If you look at the Hebrew for the living things, it's talking about stuff that needs normal oxygen supply to survive. It's literally how the Hebrew works, is stuff that breathes. So there's a lot of fish that didn't die. That makes sense because Noah wasn't told to bring any fish on the ark. There's a lot of algae in the ocean that actually went nuts as there's all this crazy stuff to eat floating around. So then all this stuff happens in the ocean at increased rates. Life is exploding in the ocean. It's having a good old time once the water settles. Then the CO2 starts to reabsorb, our planet starts to cool, and eventually you get the next effect on the chain here. You get an ice age. When you run the numbers, what you get from a global flood is crazy global warming. But what you get from the crazy global warming is a pendulum that's built up with all this energy, and when it finally reaches the top it can go, hits its final temperature, the Earth swings back and goes whoosh in the other direction and turns frigid. Now this would take some time. It would not happen all at once. It's actually pretty well understood that if you look at the fossil record, pre the Ice Age but post the flood, a lot of those floating trees that were up on the top of the ocean being tossed around actually dropped their seeds and retook root in northern climates where they've never grown since. Like places where they never can grow again, they had whole forests going up in the northern climates, above tree lines, above where trees can grow now. It was so warm in that first period right after the flood, they were growing just fine up there. Then it frosted, then we started getting massive glaciers. Places like Canada, places like northern Russia, things that we've only really seen pictures of when we draw them. Glaciers like we don't have anymore. Now, we can kind of speculate what that would look like based on fossil records, based on gorges that are carved by the canyons, or sorry, carved by the glaciers. And so we can come up with a map like this. You would also see from all this massive freezing a lower ocean level than we have now. Now, how can we know what the ocean level would be like after a flood? We don't. We're rewinding time from the ocean level we have now. You take the ocean level we have now and you go backwards through time and give it an ice age, and you can predict what the ocean level would have been like when there's this much of it frozen. Up on land, up near the caps where the ice cap is much smaller now, you would end up with an increased coastline. So you can see the white coastline here is what we have nowadays, and based on how much ice we predict there was during the ice age, based on the damage we see from the glaciers and the places we see it in, we can predict how much water was missing from the ocean, therefore we know how much it dropped, therefore we can get a new coastline. And what's interesting about the new coastline is without trying to fudge the numbers, you automatically get things we kind of needed for the Bible to be true. You get things like Japan is just part of China. You get things like Russia touches America through Alaska. These things just pop up and you don't have to fudge the numbers. Some people actually say that the level was lower than this, and that this land bridge out here would actually connect all the way to Australia. That one is not supported by everyone's numbers, but some numbers actually predict it going that low, which would mean you could walk all the way from any part on the planet to any part of the planet, barring some natural island formations that come up from volcanoes, stuff like Hawaii, you're not going to get just from a lower ocean level. But all the major land masses suddenly are just touching. They're all connected. Now that helps when you try and explain ecosystems. Because when you look at places like Hawaii, you do find animals on it post-flood. So you have to go like, okay, how the heck did that happen? And you start to try and figure it out. And you'll notice that in places like Hawaii, where it is 100% landlocked, or ocean-locked, water-locked, sea-locked? It's an island. That's the word. You don't find any large animals. There's no big ones. Why? Because most people wouldn't think to bring those. What large animals do you find on islands? The ones people would want to bring. They would want to bring things like pigs. That's what you find. They would want to bring things like oxen. That's what you find. But then on much larger places that actually might have been connected by a land bridge like Australia, you find plenty of large animals. And interestingly, what do you find in abundance at the furthest place from where the ark probably landed? You find animals that can carry their young with them. There is a huge amount of marsupial life down here on these islands that you don't find anywhere else in the world, because the animals that can come here before this land bridge disappears are only a few. Not every animal can actually do that. And then you just have natural speciation that occurs after breeding for thousands of years. After you have cousins of each other, things like the donkey-horse relationship, where they can actually have young. That sort of relationship exists all over the animal kingdom, but only between certain groups, only certain ones. Like the large cats, some of them can interbreed and have other breeds of large cats come from them. Things like I mentioned before, the mastodon, woolly mammoth, elephant link up. Those ones are likely just from speciation. So then we start to see a different picture of our planet, and that rolls right into the next thing on the timeline after the Ice Age. After the Ice Age, we need to figure out, why are people everywhere? And how did people get everywhere? And the Bible actually tells us. That's not even a question it waits for us to ask. It's just a few chapters down in your Bibles in Genesis chapter 11.
That's one letter off of saying Bible.
Well, and you know, it's got the L and the E backwards.
Yeah, that's what I meant. That's Bible. Power of Bible.
Well, it's interesting you say that because the roots are shared. Babel is actually, it comes from the same roots that mean to speak nonsense. And the root for Bible comes from biblio, or written word. So like they have a cousin sort of relationship, speaking things and writing things down. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 11. We're not going to read the whole chapter this time. There's a lot of stuff from verse 10 and on that doesn't really seem interesting enough you guys want to read it. It's basically the numbers that you would get a picture like this timeline from. It tells you how old people were when they gave birth to so-and-so. So that's like from verse 10 and on. So we're just going to read the first 9 verses, and Trinity actually gets to start us off this time because she would read last one.
At one time, all the people of the world spoke the same language and used the same words.
As the people migrated to the east, they found a plain in the land of Babylonia and settled there.
And they were saying to each other, let's make bricks and cover them with fire. In these regions, bricks were used instead of stone, and copper was used instead of stone.
Mortar.
I
Mordor.
think Moto likes you. Lord?
Then they said, come, let's build a great city for ourselves, with a tower that reaches into the sky. This will make us famous and keep us from being scattered all over the world.
But the Lord came down to look at the city and the tower. The people were building. Look, he said, the people are united, and they all speak the same language. After this, nothing they set out to do would be impossible.
Come, let's go down and confuse the people with different languages. Then they won't be able to understand each other.
In that way, the Lord scattered them all over the world, and they stopped building the city. This is why the city was called Babel, because that is where the Lord confused the people with different languages. In this way, He scattered them all over the world. Is that where we're stopping?
That's what we're stopping. The word Babel, if you see the footnote down there, it sounds very similar to the Hebrew word for confusion.
Oh.
All right, now at first read, this sounds like the imp god or like Loki or someone who's not God. This is not the God who earlier is like justice and right and you got to do the right thing. Except it is, because there's a command missing from this chapter that came earlier. He said, when you get off the ark, go all over the world. Multiply it, cover the whole face of the earth. I want you guys to actually make it a job to put everything back the way it was before the flood. And then they said, no. So he gave them the job first. He told them what was expected first. And you got to remember, it was one family. When they got off the ark, it was one family. That's why everyone spoke the same language, because, they all had the same dad. So they all spoke the same language. That was pretty logical. Then as they start to have kids, almost no one listens to what God told them. The animals did, but that was pretty much it. And there's actually pretty good evidence to suggest that the time span between the Ark and the Ice Age is a little bit less than the time span between the Ark and the Tower of Babel. It's a little fuzzy on the Ice Age, but the Tower of Babel we can measure by people's years alive. They tell us how many years someone was alive before they had their kid, who was alive for X number of years before they had their kid, who was alive for so on and so on and so on. So there's about 3 generations, like 75 years, between the getting off the boat and the building of the tower. And so in that time, there's now actually a large enough family grown from these 3 pieces of the family that they actually have enough to make a city. And instead of breaking out into the sub-families like God said, instead of going off in every direction like God said, they start building a tower to heaven. It's a weird mission, right? God says the earth is yours, and the people say, we want heaven.
That's smart.
What?
That's what Satan tried. It didn't work out.
Yeah, there's a parallel here. All through Genesis, you see people who are given God's best, and he says, pick this. I won't make you, but please pick it. It's the best. And consistently, Satan comes around in the background and says, let me tell you, that's not the best. There's a better option. It's where you take something from God instead of accepting the gift. And time after time, they pick it, and then God goes, how'd you do that? I have to punish you now. So in this case, we see people breaking out in different directions. And what's neat about this is the Bible, 1 chapter earlier, actually went through and outlined for us whose descendants from Japheth started countries that lasted. Whose descendants from Shem started countries and they lasted. Whose descendants from Ham started countries and they lasted. And from that, you can start to put together the last piece for tonight, the last piece of the puzzle, and that's the spreading out of all the peoples. And so these are the countries we can kind of nail down based on what the Bible tells us. Now, there are other countries that came later. There are other countries that we just don't know about. But these are the ones we know. And it's interesting to look at this list because when you start to look at it, you find the oldest countries in our Earth's other written histories. So the oldest nations in our other histories that are outside the Bible are all in this list. And from that, you start to paint a picture of the human progression. The other countries just aren't mentioned because they came after. It's really cool. All right, your hand was up first. What was yours?
How did people start dying faster? People were able to live like 1,000, like 100 and.
Yeah, they got close to 1,000. Methuselah was 969. Adam was like 950. So I mean, like they lived an incredibly long time. But you can see, I don't have that graphic. Anyways, I'll show you guys at some point soon. When you look at like the first 3,000 years, all of them, you start to see the waterfall change shape. So like the original waterfall of the first people, because they were like living near 1,000 years long, is a really long, drawn-out waterfall, and eventually falls to each person. But it's really long, and then you keep going, and then the waterfall's kind of like, and then you get down there, and the waterfall's like, wow, and it starts falling straight down because they were dying faster. Now, there's two reasons you can go with. You can go with the purely scientific, has nothing to do with God reason, or you can go with the God reason. And I like to go with both because neither one contradicts the other. I like that. There's a lot of times where if you start looking at the science without preconceived notions, it ends up agreeing with God. So first off, God just literally says, at the point of the flood, I'm not going to let you guys live so long anymore. He literally says that right before the flood. Like, there's going to come a point where you guys are going to be capped at 120 years and no one's going to live longer than that. That's what he says.
Well, someone did.
Yes, but you can watch the progression fall. So from the point before he said it, there was no limits. Some people lived long, some people didn't. It was just whatever. But like, they got darn close to 1,000 years. As soon as he says it, it keeps decreasing with every generation. It just keeps decreasing until he starts his own country. Right around that point on the line, that's it. Boom. No one lives longer than 120 years. You're done after that. So he said it, it happened. Now, the scientific reason is even more fun. It also says in the Bible that before the flood, there was no rain. That the earth was so rich with moisture, there was enough dew every single night to just water all the stuff. You never needed rain before that. Now, that would require some things to be true. So, like, if that's true, there would have to be other changes also that aren't getting mentioned. One of them is you would have to have a world with a temperate climate everywhere. If you had cold enough regions or warm enough regions to fight the dew effect, then that just can't be true. So you would have to have a more moderate temperatured Earth where it's not super duper hot at the equator, it's only a little bit hotter at the equator, and it's not super duper cold at the poles, it's only a little bit colder at the poles, and everything falls within the due temperature range year round. Or else the plants would all just have to be drought-proof plants, which is not sensible. We would have so many plants missing from our ecosystems if that was the case. So just the fact that God said there's not dew, we can make all these, or sorry, there's not rain, there was only dew. We can make a lot of assumptions if that's true. One of them is actually a good explanation for the long life of humans. And that is the water, he says, came from under the crust and above the atmosphere. And currently, there's not that much water above the atmosphere. There's very little. Trying to go out there and harvest it would be really foolish because it's like barely existent. But he says it came down enough to flood the planet. So that's a lot of water. So the best guess we have actually fits with how people could live that long, and that's if instead of an ozone layer around the Earth, we had an ice crystal layer around the Earth. We actually had ice crystals on the top of our atmosphere, coating the whole planet, filtering in all the light that was needed. But ice, as it turns out, is a really good blocker of the cosmic rays from the sun that are one of the driving factors of human aging. That take a person who's 20 years old and make them look noticeably younger from a person who's 40 years old. Most of that damage is not done by your body just like breaking down automatically. It's done from all the atmospheric conditions that are pushed on you by the sun. So if you could somehow take that away, boom, suddenly the difference between a 20-year-old and a 4-year-old is nothing. There's no difference physiologically.
What if you didn't go out in the sun?
Well, there's other problems. You need certain parts of sunlight. to produce things like vitamin D to keep your body functioning normally. And then there's other parts of sunlight that are slowly killing you. So it's a double-edged sword now. And previously, if you had a good enough shield, it wouldn't be. You would only be getting those positive qualities.
So people say science they're close to age reversal. So wouldn't that thing that God said change?
It would. There's an interesting flip side to that because what we read tonight. He said, at this point, when everyone speaks the same language, nothing will be too hard for them. So when he says something like no one will ever live past 120 after this, he can be right and also know that someday he would be wrong, as long as he also knows he's going to put a stop to everything before that day comes.
Oh,
Does that make sense?
God!
So if he puts his foot down and that's the end of time, and like if we'd been here another month, they would have unlocked it. He's still right when he said it, because he knows when he's going to put his foot down. Does that work? So there are things where God knows, like if he just let this clock run indefinitely, other bad things could happen too. Not just like undoing aging. That's not inherently bad. We could just wreck the environment and we would have a totally like useless Earth. If you let us go long enough, I'm sure we could accomplish it.
And go to Mars.
So he knows, yes, there are things that could happen if he just left his hands off for too long. But that's why he doesn't leave his hands off. That's
So
why
God-
he keeps himself involved in all this stuff. That's why he has put an end date on all of this.
That makes sense. That's
Being pretty close to what is a really big question. Beyond just the pretty close. Because they've been pretty close to nuclear fusion for like a really long time. And they're still pretty close. And I know they'll get there. I don't doubt it. Pretty close doesn't mean much anymore. It's like pretty close to a proof of concept, pretty close to your first animal testing, pretty close
Okay.
to...
Last question. Either did the water that came out of the ground, was that salt water?
Ooh, very good question. So the salt wouldn't inherently be in it, I don't think, in the undercrust phase. But it could collect some as it comes up through the rock layers. It's totally possible.
So
But it's going to get mixed with all the other ocean water. So yes, salty, probably not as salty, probably
actually,
diluted.
I have a way better question. If God knows that there's only 1% of actually clean water to drink in the whole entire world, that's not either frozen or salt. So is he gonna do something about that when we run out of water or run out of oil and
Ooh, here's a great question. What is the timeline we're assuming it gets produced by? Because this is one of the other issues with assuming the world is as old as people say it is. When you start assuming that, you start assuming oil takes that long to make.
well, like
When
we're
you
running out
assume
of
that,
soy
you assume the rate at which the water changes its supplies. Does that make sense? Like you're assuming a rate based on the assumed timeline. So one of the problems with that is that, as far as we can tell, oil doesn't form that slowly because we actually have new evidence that oil has been formed within our lifetime. Where we've actually seen peat bogs go under the ocean and get collapsed over by like mudslides. We knew the peat bog was there. We knew exactly where it is. We knew where it got buried. We knew how deep it got buried. And 50, 60, 70 years later, we go looking and it's oil now. It's like, that's not what we've been told. We've been told it took millions and millions of years for all of our oil deposits to form. But one has now formed while people were alive watching.
Wow.
So to see that starts to paint a different picture of the timeline of things like that. And then likewise, running out of fresh water is a real risk for parts of the earth. But God said the earth is going to last on the whole until he comes back. Now that doesn't mean it's going to be in good condition when he gets back. It could be scary bad when he gets back. And that still fits with his prophecies, because his prophecies say it's going to be scary bad when he gets back. So I can't promise you it's going to be good all the way up to the last minute, but I know it's going to be usable all the way up to the last minute. Does that make sense? Because he said so. Now, some of that's just me taking it on faith, but yeah, you really have to run the numbers under two assumptions. One, with the world billions of years old, and one with it being 6,000 years old, and see if they come out with the same answer. Because they don't always. Yeah, Hunter.
So is the limit 120
Now, yes.
years now?
He
Like
wanted to
nobody
give
has
us
how much.
Our record breakers
He
are
gave
like
us
109.
I thought it was like one.
You say it so
Yeah.
passionate.
Is there a 116? I don't know.
I thought there someone that lived to like 130 or something.
Well, and there has been, but you'd have to go back far enough. That makes sense. So, anyways, so here we go. Here's our collective timeline. We'll slowly add to it as the days and weeks go by. We've got creation, sin, death, someone getting to go up to heaven early, flood, ice age. Now, keep in mind, the ice age actually goes from here straight through, and it ends just a smidge off the line. We'll show you next week.
Oh, so
The ice age end was probably right over here at the beginning of next week's timeline.
wait, are we done?
For tonight, we have question time. We have question time. Yes, Jim.
If you're related to Ham, could you be considered a Hamanite?
Oh, good
If
question.
so, I want to be a Hamanite.
I want to be a
All right, so
I
far
want
as
to
we
be a
know,
Hammy boy.
so far as
heavy
we know,
boy.
Ham's descendants predominantly took over Africa. Now there may be other descendants that took over other parts, and I guarantee there's a lot of other intermingling.
Well, my
Because
mom's
what we're looking at is only that slice of time.
Slice
We're only
of
looking at a
ham.
small slice of time. So to say they colonized Africa and then never left, that's going too far. Like we can't prove that. We don't know that. Moses wrote this in let's see, where was Moses? Moses wrote this in this region of next week. So when he wrote this stuff, it was still true, but once he wrote it, it can now change again, and he was still telling the truth. So if they started in Africa and then went elsewhere, like for sure that's true, he wouldn't know about it. He died. His book was already written. So like, it's only true from this small period to there, and then that's it. After that, people get to move. They go all over the place.
I'm gonna call myself
People
a
have done their
Hamanite now.
best to track these people groups, and we've done a decent job. But we're talking about stuff that's thousands of years old. We're relying on archaeology. There's different viewpoints. It's not an easy thing. All right, Jaden doesn't care anymore. Anyone else have a question? If I bored the person who asked the question, then I should stop.
Oh no, I just wanted to hear the words. We could be related to Ham. That's all I wanted to hear.
You could be related. Okay. All right. Anyone else? Any other questions?
Reach.
All right. I didn't bring up my favorite part about. Oh yeah. Go ahead.
Our regular
person known as 116.
Oh good. You looked it up. So Nathan was right.
Japanese.
Nice.
I was spot on.
Spot on.
I guess.
Yeah. Interestingly,
I like Renee.
Interestingly, the oldest cultures we have on record is China and, do you know the other one?
Japanese.
Africa.
Australia.
Syria.
Yeah. English.
Australia.
Nope.
New Zealand.
Egypt.
North
There we
Korea.
go.
That's what
So the oldest ones we have
Turks.
is Egypt and China, and now recently outdoing those two, but being debated very heavily is the Israelites. And if you look at a map of the list of places, it's interesting to look at the timelines. Those three main collections of people match up to the three sons of Noah perfectly. With, believe it or not, the Israelites group being the one that didn't go that far after the Tower of Babel. Their group coming from Shem's side of the family would have just left the Noah's Ark, gone over to Babylon, and then come right back again. They didn't go that far. And then Japheth's group was the one who went down to Egypt, and then Ham's group, Ham's group was the one that went down to Egypt. Japheth's group was the one that went off towards China. And then they branched from those places. But weirdly, there's a portion of Shem's group that actually went all the way to the Americas. That's the really crazy cool part, is that the people of Shem's family and the people of Japheth's family were basically surrounding the Pacific Ocean. And so you get an interesting intermingling of the bloodlines between those people into the group known as the Polynesians. They likely have a good 50-50 of Japheth and Shem's sides of the family. So, very cool stuff. Yeah, my favorite part of all this I didn't even mention tonight, and that's just the fossil record. The fossil record matches up with a worldwide flood so perfectly it hurts. It perfectly mimics what you would see in a worldwide flood, which is burial of species in order of altitude. That is exactly what we see in the fossil record, is that things down in the bottom of the ocean, they're getting pummeled by these brand new openings with floodwaters coming out from under the crust. they get in the fossil record first. And then after that, you get into the the less deep water fish, and then you get into the shoreline fish, and then you get into the shoreline animals on the land, the amphibians, and you get into the crabs and stuff. And then you get into the people that are just up in the edge forests and not people, but, huh? Kingles?
Candles? Candles?
I don't know what's happening. Why are you saying kingles? That is a word, Hunter. Well done. Does anyone know what a candle has to do with the fossil record?
Oh,
I feel like I'm in Alice in Wonderland. How is a candle like the fossil record?
Well, candles are alive.
Fossil.
Hunter, go to the ER. You're having a stroke. You need to get that looked at, okay? It's important, Hunter. Remember. ER. Remember. Yes, Jeremiah.
I dispute that claim. The candlestick.
Alright, we need to finish. You guys are ridiculous.
It was a lie.
Alright.
Not the candle.
Dinner was alive.
Alright, we're gonna pray. Before you leave, double check that you've put your vote into the laptop. If you have not done that so far. If you're gonna be here through the summer, this is really important. You get to have your say of what we do this summer, right here, right now. Once summer hits, laptop's gone, no more voting, you don't get your say. It's fixed. You have nothing, no control. But if you're gonna be here during the summer, you should go do it now. Okay? So anyways, and sign up for camp before Easter, save $20. All right, let's pray. Shh. We're gonna pray. I say shush. You guys stop making noise instead of making quieter noise. Lord, we just thank you for your word. Thank you that you've opened up these deep, dark recesses of history to us. That you don't just leave us to figure it out on our own. You actually tell us the whole story. Help us, Lord, to have faith when we're not sure about stuff, but Lord, more than that, to ask questions. To seek your truth. To not just get scared because we don't know. Help us, Lord, to always look for your truth. Help us to be sure of what you've said and to never let go of it. We ask all that in your name. Amen. I love you guys. I'm going to print more camp flyers so we don't run out. And yeah, sign up for camp.
Going to Caleb.
All right, next week.
Are you going to Caleb?
Camp.
Caleb, are you going to camp?
We played a game about
Yay! I'll see you there if I go, actually.
And we did play really short.
Excuse me?
Sorry if I
Full
ain't
bucket?
Yes!
Oh,
Junior! Junior!
Say, can you do phone bucket? Phone that bucket.
Really, Hunter?
Sheep!
I want
The
to
sheep!
Phone it.
How does beer?
Someone in you drop. It's not my fullness.
It's charming.
Will my phone
Why? No, it's too good.
Press one.
Oh, I won! Yay! I get more silver with the toy.
great chair, please put it away.
What is this long screen? Right. What is this? I need to know. Well, why?
I checked. I almost got my I suck this half off. Need the white game ball. Need the game ball. You don't need the black one. Whoa! He's no, he said we're including them. No. Okay, let's go. So, Caleb, me, no, me, Caleb, Nate, Nate, Caleb, Nate. I'm
killing me.
You're more than that?
No, I'm older than that.
That's short to me.
I have 6 cats.
Sorry.